Thousands of years ago, ancient boats plied the waters of the Nile. Hundreds of years ago, it was the turn of single-sailed feluccas. Only a century ago, the first steamboat Sudan rode this historic river. Today, there are hundreds of motorized tourist boats. Just like ours, Alexander the Great, with all its luxuries.
Every year, between June and September, the Nile inundated its banks and left behind fertile black soil leached from its source. The blackened land grew abundant produce year after year, and sustained a continuous civilization for thousands of years. To this day, the river's banks are lush with greenery and farms. Two narrow strips of green on either side of a long river, which meanders from Aswan in the south and empties into the Mediterranean in the north. This fertile band is just an oasis, occupying only 4% of Egypt. The rest of this country is an arid desert.
For over 3,000 years before Christ, 31 dynasties of pharaohs ruled this land. Narmer was the first among them. The site where a few stelas and statues still stand was once the country's capital. It was then known as Memphis. It stands at the fork of the Nile Delta near today's Cairo. Territory to its north was known as Lower Egypt, and that to the south as Upper Egypt. Today, the remnant glory of Memphis is an alabaster sphinx and a huge statue of Ramesses II, a recent pharaoh whose relics abound all over Egypt.
In this land ruled by men, a woman named Hatshepsut dared to be a pharaoh defying tradition and odds. She became the ruler of Egypt during its 18th dynasty of kings, a precedent that paved the way for later female monarchies everywhere.
Her life, as well as those of other pharaohs, are inscribed in hundreds of monuments. Yet, until recently, they were unreadable because they were written in a pictorial language called Hieroglyphics, which disappeared 1,600 years ago. Luckily, in the 19th century, a brilliant French archaeologist, Jean-François Champollion, rediscovered this language. he examined a slab of rock called the Rosetta Stone, inscribed with the same message but in 3 different scripts. Hieroglyphic, its curvy form hieratic, and the Greek-influenced demotic. He compared all 3 forms and decoded hieroglyphics. And since then, the extraordinary lives of Hatshepsut and other pharaohs have come to light. As we gape at these writings and reliefs, guides like Noah and Muhammad explain them to us.
So much, or believed so much in the afterlife, that they will live once again after their death, or after their death.
And the main god of Egypt, from 1550 till 525 before the Christ.
We learn that Egyptians believed in many gods. At the top of this divine hierarchy was Ra, the sun, the creator god, who at various times had various names and forms. Ta, Atum, Rahorachti, and Amun-Ra.
He said, I came into being before the being came into being.
This sun god rose to life in the east. So, to celebrate life, towns and huge temples were built on the Nile's eastern bank. According to myth, this sun god was rolled across the sky from dawn to dusk by a scarab beetle. And at sunset, he died in the west. So, on the west bank of the Nile, huge mortuaries were built.
Of these, the pyramids are the best known. The one at Saqqara near Cairo was the first one to be built 4,650 years ago. "200 feet tall, it was the mortuary of Djoser, a 3rd dynasty pharaoh. 6 enormous square slabs of diminishing size were stacked on top of each other over his tomb, or mastaba as it was known then. They look like 6 big steps into the sky leading to the sun god Ra.
This was the design of Imhotep, the master architect of that time. The largest collection of pyramids of Egypt is at Giza on the outskirts of Cairo. The one that appears tallest is not really the biggest. It is the one behind, which sits on lower ground and is 480 feet tall. It was built by the pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty. 2.5 million stone blocks, each weighing 2.5 tons, were used to build it. Not by slaves, but by willing subjects. Did Hatshepsut walk about here as we do now? Herodotus, Alexander, and Napoleon certainly did. Today we follow in their footsteps. A narrow entrance leads to the tomb within. But there is not much left inside anymore. Other pyramids have been found to be richer, with writings called pyramid texts and sarcophagi.
Khufu's son Khafre built a slightly smaller pyramid next to his father's. We still see the remnants of plaster on its apex. And right in front is a huge sphinx carved out of a single rock. Its pharaonic face has lost its nose, though the royal headcloth, Nemes and Uraeus, the cobra hood, are still visible. And between the sphinx's paws rests a small stela of Pharaoh Thutmose IV of Hatshepsut's dynasty. This monument was buried in sand until 200 years ago, until Napoleon's soldiers excavated it.
The third pyramid of this group is only 208 feet tall and was built by grandson Menkaure. Three very small pyramids attributed to queens complete the set at Giza. In Hatshepsut's time, all of them had smooth faces and carried meaningful inscriptions. But with time, both man and nature have had their impact on the hundreds of pyramids built in those days. Each pyramid was made to last forever and protect the body of the pharaoh within, in his passage to an eternal afterlife. But centuries before Hatshepsut was born, pharaohs had stopped building such pyramids.
During her time, the center of power had shifted from Memphis to Thebes, the city 700 kilometers upstream on the Nile. To this day, this place flourishes with life and visitors. We know this place as Luxor.
That evening, we rode a felucca. From our Nubian boatman, we gained a glimpse into Hatshepsut's early life.
3,500 years ago, Hatshepsut was born here, the only child of Queen Ahmose and Pharaoh Thutmose I of the 18th dynasty. Because she was a girl, she did not have the right to the throne. By tradition, only a legal son of a pharaoh did. In his absence, the right passed on to the son-in-law. So, when Hatshepsut married her own half-brother, the son of her father and a mere concubine, he became the next pharaoh, Thutmose II.
The sun is ready to set and it is getting darker. Our boatman continues his story.
But husband Thutmose died prematurely and history repeated itself. Hatshepsut's only daughter married her half-brother, the son of her father and a concubine, Isis. This young child was crowned as the new pharaoh, Thutmose III.
But the sun has set and it is time to return. The boatman has more to say. One boatman furls the sail and secures it to the boat. And we drift towards the bank.
Stepmother Hatshepsut became the young pharaoh's regent. but she had higher aspirations. She wanted to be a pharaoh herself and would not be denied that status because of her sex. She convinced her subjects that she was in fact the daughter of god Amun-Ra, who visited her mother Queen Ahmose one night in place of her mortal father Thutmose I. The god had arranged to beget a daughter of his own to rule this sacred land.
We return to the shore, to the cool spot. Our minds were still engaged in that story.
The people accepted Hatshepsut's claim because of its timing. That year, the annual flooding was just right. Nilometers, wells whose water level rose with the river, showed that the flooding was neither too little to cause drought nor too much to overrun the land.
That year, they grew more barley, wheat, and fruit. There was plenty to eat and drink. Though what they ate and drank in ancient Egypt was perhaps much different from today's menus. But we do know that in those days, they made lots of bread and beer.
They also had more hibiscus flowers to make karkade, a delicious wine-colored drink sold to this day on the streets of Egypt.
They harvested more flax, spun yarn, and wove linen for clothes. No Egyptian cotton in those days.
The mines in the desert yielded copper, gold, lapis lazuli, and gemstones for jewelry. The mountains yielded granite, limestone, and alabaster. There was plenty of work to be done for stonemasons and scribes.
And there was an abundance of papyrus plants. Thin strips from its stem are soaked, laid on cloth and squeezed into paper. And on this surface, scribes wrote, recorded history, painted images and magic spells.
They played music on harps and noise and danced. There was prosperity and the people were very happy. All this was a sign of approval of Hatshepsut from god Amun-Ra himself.
So, at this temple of Karnak for Amun-Ra, the priests crowned Hatshepsut, a woman, to be their pharaoh. In those days, the waters of the Nile lapped the entrance to this amazing temple. Today, we have to walk to it, along an avenue of ram-faced sphinxes. Beyond the huge pylon are the shrine of Amun-Ra, his consort Mut, and their son, the moon god Khonshu. Hatshepsut was anointed like any male pharaoh. She wore a double crown, a white one for Upper Egypt and a red one for Lower Egypt. She sported a royal beard and crossed her arms, holding the traditional hook and flail. A titular cartouche with the name Matkira, spirit of Mat, the goddess of peace and daughter of Amun, was added to her birth name cartouche. But sadly enough, today in that temple, rebuilt by her own father Thutmose I, there are few inscriptions or images of her reign. Only in modern times did archaeologists rediscover a red chapel that she built,
but one side still reminds us of Hatshepsut. It is a broken obelisk in a courtyard with her cartouches. And another is the site of two standing obelisks. She built one to honor her father Thutmose I and another for her own glory. The apex of each obelisk was plated with gold to reflect the morning sun all over Thebes and glorify Amun-Ra. But her most ambitious large obelisk never made it to Karnak. It still lies cracked and incomplete at a stone quarry near Aswan.
Hatshepsut has been forgotten here. But the memories of several later pharaohs remain. We see a beautiful pillar for the Nubian pharaoh Taharqa, a pillared hall for Thutmose III, more huge statues for Ramesses II, and the site of ram-faced sphinxes for Amun-Ra, protecting the great pharaoh. Wall reliefs for gods and pharaohs are everywhere, but no memories of Hatshepsut.
The next structure is the real highlight of Karnak. We need to tilt our heads back all the way to see an incredible forest of towering stone papyri. It was built by Sethi II and is known as the Great Hypostyle Hall. Rich with hieroglyphs and images, it is an unforgettable sight.
Today's visitors get to see this vast monument even at night, with its salient landmarks lit up with floodlights. We realize then that this temple is a treasury of ancient history and myth, all built around a sacred tank, and is spread over 100-acre estate. This monument is indeed the jewel of Egypt.
From Karnak, an avenue of sphinxes leads us to another glorious monument. The Temple of Luxor. A shrine that began with Hatshepsut in celebration of Opet, the mystical union of the pharaoh with god Amun-Ra. 100 years after Hatshepsut, Pharaoh Amenhotep III reconstructed this temple. Ramesses II added to it, and later dynasties of Romans and Greek pharaohs expanded it. In the first millennium after Christ, it served also as a church. Later, even a mosque was added. The entire temple sits right on the banks of the Nile.
Senenmut was Hatshepsut's devoted scribe, architect, and even a nanny to her daughter. The rumor was that he was also the Pharaoh's secret lover. He designed and built a funerary temple for his queen at Deir el-Bahri on the West Bank. It was his Taj Mahal in red sandstone and is as unique as any pyramid. It seems to project out of a hill excavated into a horseshoe. We walk up 3 successive large terraces. Each with a long corridor of fluted pillars. Senenmut chiseled his lover's face into every image and her name into every wall. And built his own tomb secretly under the temple in the hope of joining her in eternity.
Sadly, much of Hatshepsut's glory had been defaced. In a remnant relief, we see bearers of luxurious goods and spices, and saplings of myrrh are planting in Hatshepsut's gardens. These were gifts from the land of Punt, claimed to be today's Somalia. A reminder that her 22-year reign was one of peace, diplomacy, and trade.
At least her funerary temple still stands. The one for Amenhotep III was razed to the ground by man, nature, and flooding. All that remains now are 2 mammoth statues of the pharaoh, still on guard over his long-gone estate. Today we call these statues by their Greek name, the Colossi of Memnon,
When Hatshepsut's father Thutmose I died, he chose to build his tomb on an arid hilly tract of land on the west bank of Thebes. Later pharaohs followed his example. For this reason, this burial site for pharaohs is known today as the Valley of the Kings.
The tombs of these pharaohs have simple doorways, but beyond them lies an incredible world of fantasy and color. Each tomb is a long descending corridor of chambers excavated out of limestone. As we walk past chamber after chamber, we see wall after wall of mythical symbolism and hieroglyphs, all spells and guides to aid the deceased in his afterlife. We see images of many gods. Anubis, god of the dead, with his jackal's face. Hathor, the goddess of renewal, sometimes with a cow's face and a sun between her horns. Thoth, the god of wisdom, with the face of an ibis. Osiris, god of fertility with two plumes. His wife Isis, goddess of magic, recognized by the throne on her crown. And their son Horus, the first ruler of Egypt, with the face of a falcon. And Desai Wadjet, a symbol of regeneration. And of course the Ankh, the symbol of life, is everywhere. The final chamber houses the sarcophagus of the dead pharaoh.
When Hatshepsut died, she was only 38 years of age. Some say she was poisoned by her stepson and successor Thutmose III. What we do know is that he destroyed her images, hieroglyphics and cartouches 20 years after her death.
She was buried like a true male pharaoh, not in her own funerary temple, but in her father's tomb. Before burial, her brain was removed through her nostrils. All her vital organs, excepting the heart, were preserved in canopic jars. Her body was mummified in salts called natron, spices and incense. The process took 70 days. And then she was laid to rest in her own sarcophagus, next to her father's.
When her father's tomb KV20 was discovered by Carter 200 years ago, only her father's mummy was found. Her own mummy had disappeared. Just one canopic jar with her liver was ever found. Tomb robbers had desecrated her eternal rest.
But robbing tombs was commonplace throughout Egyptian history. Only one tomb survived such plunder, that of Tutankhamun, a minor pharaoh. His treasures are still on display at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
The Nile Valley, ruled by Hatshepsut, does not flood naturally anymore. To control the flow of the river, 2 dams were built in the last century near Aswan. The waters rose behind these dams, threatening to drown many of Egypt's monuments upstream.
Frequently, the older and smaller reservoir rose into the island temple at Philae for the goddess Isis, the mother goddess of Egypt, beloved of Hatshepsut. Though started during the time of Dharka, the temple reached its glory only 1,000 years later, during the time of the Greek Pharaohs, the Ptolemies. What we see today is a reassembled temple sitting on dry, higher ground.
The temple had to be moved to prevent its submergence by Lake Nasser, formed when a new modern Aswan dam was built in 1970 to regulate the Nile River.
Even the tall, magnificent temple at Abu Simbel would have drowned in Lake Nasser's waters. This temple was built by Ramesses II 100 years after Hatshepsut. Even these 4 colossal sandstone statues of the pharaoh at the temple's entrance would have been underwater. A similar fate awaited all the treasures of paintings and reliefs which decorate the pillars, hallways, and chambers within. To save this monument, it was relocated to higher ground. So was the neighboring, smaller, but similar temple for Nefertari, the pharaoh's wife. The pharaoh loved his wife and arranged her deification by building this temple. In its halls we see a touching scene in which the pharaoh offers flowers to his wife. Neither of these monuments would have survived a watery grave.
Many monuments in Nubia were similarly endangered.
We cruised Lake Nasser on the Prince Abbas, a 19th century boat luxuriously rebuilt for today's travel. We got to see other rescued monuments. We rowed small boats to sandy banks and islands to see the rest of these monuments.
A few of them go as far back as Ramesses II, the great builder who ruled over Nubia. but many more are recent, built by Greek pharaohs and influenced by Roman emperors. And quite often, these temples served as jump-off points for the spread of Christianity in Nubia.
We encountered many colorful Nubians in their galabeas as they traded souvenirs.
This is alabaster.
Sure alabaster.
And entertained us.
Amurra.
Ramses Amun. Mor biyaya. Tawo biyaya. Shuha biyaya. Bandar biyaya.
We returned to Cairo, today's capital of Egypt, and stayed at the Nile Hilton. Given Cairo's modernity, its shops, and entertainment, its crowds and cars, its global growth, it is hard to feel its connection to the Pharaonic age. That culture has been replaced by today's distinctly Islamic ambience. With its citadels and mosques. Part of it also Christian, of the Coptic kind. Even Judaism still persists.
All we had was just 15 days to digest the history of Egypt. So we had to be content with just a glimpse of it. For a deeper understanding of this ancient land, even a lifetime is too little.